Mystery of Singing Sand Dunes. Singing Dunes is a mountain of sand of light colors, has a length of 3 kilometers and a height of 150 meters. The dune is located in the National Park Altan-Emel in Almaty Oblast of Kazakhstan, 182 kilometers northeast of Almaty. The Singing Dunes were formed as a result of geological changes in the Semirechye, Jetisu, Seven Rivers region about 200,000 years ago. A part of the Ulkan-Kalkan, Big Kalkan, volcano shifted, forming the mountains known as Kishi Kalkan, Small Kalkan. In this new corridor, like in a wind tunnel, the winds blowing from the southeast to the west-northwest pulled in the sands, which lay at the foot of the volcano, forming huge dunes about 10 to 12,000 years ago. The mountains of the Big and Small Kalkans surround the Singing Dunes, thus preserving its unchanged shape. Singing Dunes is a phenomenon of nature, famous for the fact that when the weather is dry, the sand dune emits a sound similar to the tune of organ. Also, the dune is known for the beautiful views overlooking the surrounding countryside. Singing Dunes is a popular tourist attraction. Singing sands caused a lot of folk superstitions from ancient times. In the legends, the singing sands of the desert are explained by the activities of spirits, imaginary animals, sound of the bells of the buried cities, powerful and raging underground rivers, and a lot of other unusual causes. The sound of the Singing Dune is reminiscent of low throat singing, the low sound of an organ, or the rumble of a jet aircraft, which is heard for several kilometers around. It occurs in dry, windy weather, when the sand mass moves. There are various theories about the mysterious mechanism of the singing sand. According to one of them, the sound frequency depends on the shear rate of the sand mass. Other scientists believe that the vibration frequency is related to the thickness of the dry surface layer of sand. Sound waves resonate between the surface of the dune and the surface of the wet layer, increasing the volume of the sound. The sound itself can be caused by the friction between the grains of sand, or by the compression of air between them. The sound effect is achieved not only with the wind, but also with mechanical action, if you slide down the dry slope of the dune. But scientists have expressed concerns about the stability of this sandy ecosystem. Frequent descents from the slopes of the dune cause the grinding of grains of sand and the accumulation of a dusty fraction, which over time can lead to the loss of the ability of the singing dune to produce a sound. The science behind singing sand dunes has been a topic of intense debate over the last few decades. There have been many theories that associate the sand songs with the nature of the wind, the size of the grain particles, the landscape of the deserts, and the structure of the dunes, but most of them failed to explain all the questions related to the booming. What initiates the booming? How can it be audible that far away? Why does the sound resemble musical notes? And why don't all dunes sing? Not all dunes are good singers. The dunes must satisfy certain conditions for them to produce these rolling sounds. Firstly, the sand must be super dry, which is pretty easy to achieve in a desert. However, even tiny amounts of moisture or humidity can muffle the dunes. The sand particles must have a uniform size, average diameter of 201/4 m. This condition is met by the wind. The wind always tends to lift particles within a certain size range, acting as a sieve for the sand. The sand particles must be spherical and smooth. Quartz sand is known for its rounded, polished structure, so booming has been observed predominantly in dunes containing a large amount of quartz. Science behind singing dunes. During an avalanche, the uniformly sized sand grains rub against each other. This sharing of grains produces frictional energy, similar to the bows of the violin. Also, when the sand slides down from a height, the potential energy of the sand gets converted to kinetic energy, which also acts as an additional energy source. The energy from the avalanche makes even more sand particles vibrate, so the frictional and kinetic energy gets converted into vibrational energy within the sand. This results in the generation of short pulses of sound called burps. Remember the mention of drum sand in the movie Dune? When Paul accidentally steps on patches of drum sand, the sand amplifies the sound of his steps, thereby attracting the sandworm to him. Like the drum sand of Arrakis, our singing dunes transform the short burps from the avalanche into a loud, long hum. The waveguide theory. A waveguide, as the name suggests, is something that guides a wave. When you were little, you probably noticed that using a cardboard tube to speak into the ears of your friend made you sound louder and better. This is a classic example of a waveguide. It prevents the sound waves from escaping to the external environment and amplifies them via internal reflection. The thickness of the waveguide determines the frequency that it primarily amplifies. If the waveguide is too narrow, it cannot propagate the sound. According to the waveguide theory by Natalie Vriand and M.L. Hunt, the loose layer of sand that is sandwiched between the atmosphere and the rigid subsurface layer of the dune acts as a seismic waveguide. The cavities in the loose sand layer, like the cavity of a violin, excite a particular frequency from the burping emission, thus setting and initiating the distinct roll. The solid sublayer of the dune reflects the waves and prevents their dissipation. Thus, the sound gets amplified on a large scale within the sand, and finally moves out into the atmosphere as a song. Conclusion. Thus, the shearing sand instigates the sound, the waveguide sets the frequency, the hard sublayer amplifies the signal, and finally, the surface of the dune lets the song out into the atmosphere like a loudspeaker. This theory also explains why the sound produced by each dune is distinct, and why all dunes don't sing. Depending on the thickness of the sand layer, the amplified frequency varies, and at some thicknesses, no frequency is enhanced. The dune songs usually occur within a frequency range of 70 to 105 Hz. Similarly, the sand must be dry, as wet sand is compact and alters the layering of the dune. Also, the presence of uniform, spherical grains provides better shearing. Thus, out of all the theories put forth so far, the waveguide theory is the one that provides the most closure to the science behind the phenomenon. The singing dunes are essentially giant musical instruments created and played by nature. The lingering songs of the desert have inspired artists and scientists alike. Hearing the rumbling dunes will surely haunt and stir your mind in a lonely desert. No wonder ancient travelers were led astray by this mystical hum.